My name is Lindsay, and at 28, I never imagined facing my father in court. The same man who abandoned us when I was 8 suddenly reappeared after my grandmother left me an unexpected fortune. There he stood, demanding every penny despite his 20-year absence from my life. As the judge looked between us, waiting for my response to his outrageous claims, I took a deep breath and spoke words that dropped the room into complete silence. My father's face drained of color. Before I tell you what I said that day, drop a comment about where you're watching from. If my story resonates with you, please subscribe to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of emotional neglect. I grew up in Mapleton, a small town in Ohio where everyone knew everyone. My childhood home was a modest 2-bedroom house with fading blue paint and a perpetually leaking roof. My father Richard worked as a sales representative for a manufacturing company, while my mother Grace waitressed at the local diner. We were never wealthy, but we got by until that rainy Tuesday when Dad packed his bags. I remember that day with painful clarity. My 8-year-old self sat at the kitchen table working on multiplication homework, while my 5-year-old brother Kevin played with toy cars on the linoleum floor. The front door slammed and Mom appeared in the doorway, mascara running down her cheeks. "Your father is gone," she said simply, her voice hollow. "No goodbye, no explanation. Just gone." The financial impact was immediate and brutal. Mom took on a second job as a night cleaner at the local hospital, working 16-hour days that left her exhausted but determined. Our old Chevy broke down monthly, leaving us stranded until Mom could scrape together repair money. My school clothes came from thrift stores, and I learned to ignore the whispers from classmates when I wore the same jeans 3 days in a row. Our diet became a predictable rotation of spaghetti, macaroni, and cheese, and whatever was on special at the grocery store. I became an expert at stretching a pound of ground beef across multiple meals. At 9 years old, I became a second parent to Kevin. I walked him to and from school, helped with his homework, made simple meals, and read bedtime stories when Mom worked late. I ironed his clothes for school pictures and helped him practice for the spelling bee. My childhood dissolved into responsibility far too early. My 9th birthday arrived 3 months after Dad left. Mom had arranged a small party with a homemade cake. That morning, the phone rang, and Mom handed it to me with a tight smile. It was Dad, promising he would stop by with a special gift. I spent the entire day watching the window, straightening my new secondhand dress, rehearsing what I would say. He never showed. The next day, he called with excuses about car trouble. 2 weeks later, a card arrived with $20 and a generic message. This pattern repeated for years. He would promise to attend Kevin's baseball games, my school concerts, holiday gatherings, always with last-minute cancellations. The excuses evolved from car trouble to work emergencies to being out of town. Birthday cards arrived sporadically, always with impersonal messages and diminishing cash gifts until they stopped entirely. Despite these disappointments, I threw myself into academics. School became my sanctuary, a place where effort yielded predictable rewards. While other teens socialized on weekends, I studied determined to earn scholarships. My room filled with honor roll certificates and academic awards. Each achievement felt like a shield against our circumstances, proof that we could succeed despite Dad's abandonment. When I was 16, I encountered my father unexpectedly at the grocery store. I had stopped to pick up milk on my way home from my after-school cashier job. There he stood in the cereal aisle, examining nutrition labels as if he had all the time in the world. He looked the same, yet different, a bit heavier with silver, threading his dark hair. He wore a leather jacket I had never seen before. "Lindsay," he said, his eyes widening, "look at you all grown up." The conversation that followed was excruciating in its superficiality. He asked about school as if inquiring about the weather. When I mentioned being in AP classes, he nodded vaguely, displaying no knowledge of my academic achievements. He promised to call soon for a proper catch-up, maybe take me to lunch. That call never came. Mom never spoke ill of Dad, but her lessons shaped my worldview nonetheless. "The only person you can truly count on is yourself," she would say while balancing checkbooks late at night. "Be kind, but never mistake kindness for weakness." She worked through illnesses, injuries, and exhaustion, showing me that resilience wasn't optional but necessary. My high school graduation arrived on a sweltering June day. As valedictorian, I delivered a speech about perseverance to a cheering crowd. From the podium, I scanned the audience, searching for a face I knew wouldn't be there. I had mailed an invitation to his last known address, returned as undeliverable. Mom and Kevin sat in the front row, Mom's eyes swimming with tears of pride, Kevin giving me an enthusiastic thumbs up. That night, Mom presented me with a delicate silver necklace. It was my mother's, she explained. For extraordinary women, it was the first time I realized my strength might be something to celebrate rather than merely endure. College presented a new set of challenges. I had earned a partial scholarship to Ohio State University studying business management with dreams of financial stability. The scholarship covered tuition but left room and board books and living expenses unaddressed. Student loans filled some gaps, but I still worked 20 hours weekly at the campus bookstore, plus additional shifts at a local coffee shop during peak seasons. My dormitory became a revolving door of quick changes between classes and shifts. Sleep became a luxury rather than a necessity. I developed a system of recording lectures to replay during late-night study sessions and mastered the art of writing papers on bus commutes between work locations. During my sophomore year, Kevin began experiencing mysterious symptoms, chronic fatigue, frequent infections, and unexplained weight loss. The diagnosis came during finals week, an autoimmune condition requiring specialized treatment not fully covered by my mother's insurance. I considered dropping out to work full-time, but Mom wouldn't hear of it. "Your education is your way forward," she insisted. "We'll figure this out." I compromised by adding another part-time job and reducing my course load, extending my graduation timeline. My social life dwindled to non-existent. While classmates attended football games and fraternity parties, I calculated medical payments and researched treatment options. Graduating took 5 years instead of 4, but I walked across that stage with a job offer already secured at Meridian Consulting, a mid-sized firm in Columbus. The starting salary seemed astronomical compared to my years of minimum wage, enough to help with Kevin's medical bills and establish some independence. The corporate world revealed itself as a maze of unwritten rules and invisible hierarchies. My direct supervisor, Martin, took credit for my work while delegating his responsibilities. Female colleagues warned me about certain executives to avoid being alone with. I learned to arrive early, leave late, and document everything. Despite these challenges, the company's health insurance became our lifeline. Kevin's condition required monthly infusions and quarterly specialist appointments. The premium family coverage I paid for meant the difference between manageable costs and financial ruin. During this time, I met Tyler at a company mixer. Handsome and charming, he worked in the finance department and seemed refreshingly straightforward compared to other colleagues. Our relationship progressed quickly, moving from coffee dates to dinner to weekends together within months. Tyler initially appeared supportive of my family obligations, even accompanying me to pick up Kevin from treatments occasionally. However, as we discussed moving in together, his attitude shifted. He questioned why I sent so much money to my mother, suggesting she was taking advantage of me. He criticized my modest car and wardrobe, pushing for upgrades I couldn't afford. When I mentioned Kevin's upcoming surgery, he sighed dramatically and changed the subject. My professional life reached a turning point when I was promoted to project manager, overseeing a team of 5 consultants. The salary increase meant breathing room in our budget, but the promotion bred resentment among colleagues who had been at Meridian longer. Martin, now my peer rather than supervisor, spread rumors about how I had earned the position. Lunch invitations ceased. Emails went unanswered. I became an island in an office of 40 people. Then came Mom's diagnosis, stage 2 breast cancer. The treatments would require her to reduce her work hours, putting additional financial pressure on our already strained resources. I increased my contributions to her household, cutting my own budget to the bone. The mounting stress manifested in anxiety attacks that struck without warning. During client presentations, my heart would race uncontrollably. In grocery stores, overwhelming dizziness would force me to abandon my cart. Sleep became fragmented when it came at all. The breaking point with Tyler came when I discovered unauthorized charges on my credit card, expensive dinners, I hadn't attended, electronics I'd never seen. Confronted, he admitted using my card just until payday for months. A deeper investigation revealed he had opened additional cards in my name, accumulating thousands in debt. His salary, which I had believed, went towards saving for our future, supported gambling habits and lavish gifts for friends. The breakup was ugly. Tyler threatened to tell my employer about my mental health issues. He demanded repayment for dinners and trips we had taken together. When I refused, he took my grandmother's antique vase, a birthday gift she had given me years before, claiming it as compensation. The credit damage took years to repair. I moved to a smaller apartment farther from work, adding 40 minutes to my commute but saving critical dollars. I sold my car, relying on public transportation regardless of weather. Every expense became a calculation of absolute necessity. Yet, from this low point came clarity. I enrolled in financial management courses at the local community college, learning strategies I had never been taught. I opened new accounts at a different bank, established automatic savings transfers, and created spreadsheets tracking every penny. As my financial knowledge grew, I identified a market gap for digital marketing services among small businesses. Using my lunch breaks and weekends, I built a modest freelance clientele, designing websites and managing social media accounts for local restaurants and boutiques. The side income wasn't substantial but represented something more valuable, a path toward independence from Meridian's toxic environment. My grandmother Eleanor stood as a pillar of stability throughout my life. Mom's mother had lived alone since my grandfather's passing before I was born, occupying the same modest two-story home for 50 years. Her weekly phone calls and monthly visits provided structure amid chaos. Unlike the stereotype of the cookie-baking grandmother, Eleanor was practical and direct. A retired librarian, she approached life with organized precision. Her kitchen contained alphabetized spices and labeled leftovers with consumption deadlines. Her checkbook balanced to the penny every month. During my childhood weekend, visits to Grandma's became sacred retreats. Her home smelled of lemon polish and fresh bread. She maintained a vegetable garden that supplied neighbors and family alike. While other grandparents spoiled with toys and treats, Eleanor invested in experiences and education. She funded museum memberships, music lessons, and summer reading programs. "Money comes and goes," she would say, "but knowledge stays." Eleanor lived modestly but comfortably. Her furniture remained serviceable rather than fashionable. She drove the same beige sedan for 20 years. Her indulgences were few first edition books, classical music, concerts, and annual donations to the public library. I never considered her wealthy, just careful with resources. What I didn't see was her investment portfolio built methodically across decades. A child of the Depression, she diversified across stocks, bonds, and real estate, with disciplined monthly contributions regardless of market conditions. When Eleanor was diagnosed with congestive heart failure at 83, the prognosis gave her a year at most. She faced this news with characteristic pragmatism, immediately updating her will and organizing her affairs. As her condition deteriorated, I took family leave from Meridian, moving temporarily into her spare bedroom to provide care. Those final months brought us closer than ever before. Between medication schedules and doctor appointments, Eleanor shared family histories I had never heard. She spoke about her own mother's struggle as a widow in the 1,940 seconds. She recounted meeting my grandfather at a USO dance during the Korean War. Most importantly, she talked about money, not abstract concepts, but practical wisdom about compound interest, market cycles, and patience. "I've watched you struggle," she told me one evening as I adjusted her oxygen. "Working yourself to exhaustion for others. It's time you had some security." I dismissed these comments as medication-induced confusion. Eleanor had always been generous within her means, but her estate would naturally pass to her only child, my mother. Eleanor passed peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in April. The funeral brought distant relatives and community members whose lives she had touched through her library work and volunteer activities. I delivered a eulogy highlighting her precision, generosity, and quiet strength. 2 weeks later, the family gathered in her attorney's office for the will reading. Mom squeezed my hand as Mr. Abernathy, Eleanor's attorney of 30 years, adjusted his glasses and began. The shock came immediately. While Mom received Eleanor's house and personal effects, the bulk of the estate investments, valued at $2.4 million, passed directly to me. Eleanor had apparently restructured her will after my father left, establishing trusts for both Mom and Kevin that I would oversee. "She believed you would manage these resources wisely," Mr. Abernathy explained, handing me a sealed letter from Eleanor. "This explains her reasoning." Mom seemed unsurprised and genuinely pleased. "She always said you had her head for numbers," she remarked on the drive home. That night alone in my apartment, I read Eleanor's letter through tears. She detailed watching my struggle to support the family while building my own life. She expressed admiration for my resilience but concern for my future. The inheritance, she explained, wasn't merely financial support but an opportunity to break cycles of scarcity and stress. Don't squander it on luxuries, she wrote, but don't deny yourself peace either. The following weeks brought consultations with financial advisors, tax specialists, and estate attorneys. I approached the inheritance with the same careful planning I had applied to our family budgets for years. First priorities were security and healthcare. I established a trust for Kevin's medical needs with sufficient funding to cover treatments regardless of insurance changes. For Mom, I created an account that would supplement her income, allowing her to reduce work hours during cancer treatment. Only after securing their needs did I consider my own situation. After 5 years at Meridian, my work environment had deteriorated beyond repair. With proper financial planning, I could resign without immediate replacement income. The freedom of this realization brought the first full night's sleep I had experienced in years. My resignation letter was brief and professional. Martin's surprise when I declined the exit interview counteroffer was almost comical. "Everyone has a number," he insisted. "Just tell me what it is." "It's not about money," I responded truthfully. With breathing room to consider options, I developed a business plan for expanding my freelance work into a full-service digital marketing agency specializing in small business clients. The inheritance provided startup capital for proper equipment, office space, and professional certifications I had previously deferred. The first major purchase I allowed myself was a reliable car, not luxury, but dependable transportation to client meetings. I moved to a safer apartment building with proper security. I replaced the professional wardrobe that had grown threadbare over years of tight budgets. Small comforts that had seemed extravagant quality groceries, occasional restaurant meals, a new laptop became reasonable rather than guilt-inducing. Following Eleanor's example of community support, I established an anonymous scholarship fund at my former high school for students with single parents. The first year funded 2 partial college scholarships. The local paper ran a small feature about the new program, inadvertently connecting me to the funding when they mentioned the founder was a former valedictorian from my graduation year. Word spread quickly through Mapleton about my sudden wealth. Former classmates sent Facebook messages with business proposals and investment opportunities. Distant relatives discovered renewed interest in family connections. Former teachers congratulated me with subtle hints about school donations. Most unexpected was the LinkedIn message from a woman named Rebecca claiming to be my father's attorney. The brief note requested a meeting regarding family financial matters without further explanation. I archived it without response, assuming some sort of scam. 2 days later, a formal letter arrived on law firm letterhead reiterating the request. Against my better judgment, I mentioned it to Mom during Sunday dinner. "Richard always did have perfect timing," she remarked, dryly passing the mashed potatoes. 20 years of silence until money appears. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I reviewed proposals for my new business. The number displayed as unknown, and I almost sent it to voicemail before answering on the 3rd ring. "Lindsay." The male voice sounded vaguely familiar. "It's your dad." 20 years condensed into that moment, birthdays, missed school events, unattended holidays spent watching the door. My throat tightened as conflicting emotions crashed together: curiosity, anger, a child's lingering hope. "How did you get my number?" I managed. "Your mother," he replied, which I later confirmed was a lie. "I've been trying to reconnect for years." The conversation lasted 17 excruciating minutes. Richard expressed amazement at the accomplished woman I had become. He asked about my life with superficial interest, speaking as if our separation had been a brief misunderstanding rather than 2 decades of abandonment. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him for lunch the following week. I chose a public restaurant downtown, arriving early to select a table with a clear path to the exit. Richard arrived 10 minutes late, wearing an expensive watch and designer shoes that had certainly never fit into our family budget. Age had thickened his midsection and peppered his dark hair with gray, but his smile remained the same, charming and slightly crooked. "My beautiful daughter," he declared loudly. Attempting a hug, I sidestepped into an awkward handshake. Over appetizers, he hadn't offered to pay for Richard, spun elaborate tales explaining his absence. His company had transferred him overseas suddenly. He had sent child support checks my mother must have hidden. He had called on birthdays but never got through. Each lie contradicted documented reality, yet he delivered them with such conviction that for moments I questioned my own memories. "Life hasn't been easy," he sighed, ordering a second cocktail. "The economy, you know." One setback after another. When the conversation turned to my current life, I provided minimal information. Yes, I had attended college. Yes, I was starting a business. No, I wasn't married. His follow-up questions probed for financial details with barely concealed interest. As dessert arrived, Richard dropped his first bombshell. "I'd like you to meet Melissa," he announced, showing me his phone screen displaying a blonde woman at least 15 years his junior. "My wife of 3 years. She's eager to meet you." Wife. The word landed like a slap. While Mom had remained single, raising us alone, Richard had built a new family. The meetups increased in frequency over the following weeks. Richard called regularly with invitations to dinners and suggestions for father-daughter bonding. I maintained cautious boundaries while processing my emotions with a therapist who specialized in family reconciliation. "Consider what you want from this relationship," she advised. "Not what you once needed or what he expects now." A month after our initial reunion, Richard invited me to dinner at his home, a sprawling suburban house with manicured landscaping. Melissa greeted me with practiced warmth and a flawless manicure. 32 years old, 4 years older than me, she referred to Richard as Ricky and touched him constantly. Over a dinner that Melissa had clearly catered rather than cooked, Richard cleared his throat dramatically. "Lindsay, I've been meaning to ask you something important." He detailed business ventures that had temporarily fallen through creditors who misunderstood payment terms and opportunities requiring initial investment. "I just need a small loan," he concluded. $50,000. "I'll pay you back with interest when this deal closes next month." The request confirmed my suspicions about his sudden reappearance. Still, a small part of me wondered if helping might build the relationship I had craved as a child. I consulted Mom the next day, finding her in her garden. $50,000, she laughed without humor, pulling weeds with unnecessary force. "That's his opening bid. It'll increase once you say yes." Despite her warning, I struggled with the decision. My financial advisor recommended against unsecured personal loans to anyone, particularly someone with no repayment history. My therapist suggested establishing smaller boundaries before financial ones. I compromised by offering $5,000 with a formal promissory note. Richard's disappointment was poorly concealed behind effusive thanks. "This means everything, Lindsay. I'm going to make you proud." The check cleared immediately. The monthly repayment date passed without mention. When I inquired about it, Richard described a slight delay with his business deal. Over the next 3 months, Richard's requests escalated in both frequency and amount. $10,000 for medical bills. $15,000 for a time-sensitive investment. A co-signature on a car lease. Each request came wrapped in emotional manipulation references to making up for lost time building our relationship family obligations. During a dinner where I declined to fund a guaranteed return investment, Richard excused himself to take a phone call. His cell phone remained on the table, lighting up with a text from someone named Poker Mike, referencing money owed from their last game. The gambling connection explained everything: the financial desperation, the increasing requests, the missed repayment. When confronted, Richard exploded in anger, accusing me of spying and misunderstanding. "Everyone gambles," sometimes he dismissed. "It's networking." I established clear boundaries: no more loans without repayment of the existing one. No co-signing documents. No credit references. Richard's response was a week of silence followed by renewed contact as if the conversation had never occurred. The final straw came during a tense lunch, where Richard suggested I had family obligations to help him avoid foreclosure on his house, a property I hadn't known was in jeopardy. "After all," he said, lowering his voice, "I am your father. Blood means something." "Blood meant nothing when I graduated high school," I replied. "Or when Kevin was hospitalized. Or when Mom worked double shifts to feed us." Richard's expression hardened. "I see your mother has poisoned you against me. That's unfortunate." He gathered his coat. "I had hoped we could rebuild our relationship, but perhaps my attorney needs to handle this discussion instead." The certified letter arrived 3 days later, beginning the nightmare that would lead us to court. The letter arrived on embossed stationery from Daniels and Whitmore, a law firm I recognized from billboards advertising personal injury cases. The language was deliberately intimidating, referencing parental rights and entitlements, and equitable distribution of family assets. My hands trembled as I read the absurd claim as my biological father Richard was entitled to reasonable financial support from my inheritance. The letter demanded detailed financial records and threatened court action if a satisfactory arrangement wasn't reached within 10 business days. My first reaction was disbelief, followed by panic. Could he actually do this? Would a court really consider his claim after 20 years of absence? I spent a sleepless night researching inheritance laws and precedents, finding nothing to support Richard's position, but becoming increasingly anxious nonetheless. The next morning, I contacted 3 attorneys before finding Rebecca Goldstein, a family law specialist with experience in unusual inheritance cases. Her office, unlike the imposing marble lobbies of larger firms, occupied a renovated Victorian house with comfortable furniture and soothing colors. Rebecca reviewed the letter, her expression shifting from professional interest to indignation. "This is legally nonsensical," she stated, setting it aside. "Parents have obligations to support children, not vice versa. Your inheritance came from your maternal grandmother with no connection to your father. His claim has no legal standing." "Then why threaten legal action?" I asked. "Because he's hoping you'll pay to avoid court," she explained. "It's an intimidation tactic." Rebecca drafted a response, rejecting the claim and warning against further harassment. We expected that to end the matter. 2 weeks later, we received notice of an actual court filing. Richard was suing for 1/3 of my inheritance based on a convoluted legal theory about genetic contribution to lifetime earnings potential and paternal investment in character development. The complaint included false claims about regular visitation, financial support, and ongoing participation in my upbringing. "This is unprecedented," Rebecca admitted during our strategy meeting. "There's no legal basis, but the novelty might get it past initial dismissal. We need to prepare as if it's going to hearing." Sleep became elusive as the court date approached. Anxiety manifested in physical symptoms: stomach, pain, tension, headaches, jaw clenching that left my teeth aching each morning. I lost 8 pounds in 2 weeks as my appetite vanished. My mother and Kevin rallied around me. Kevin took time off work to help organize documentation proving Richard's absent school records, showing only Mom's signature medical forms listing her as sole guardian birthday cards with postmarks showing years-long gaps. "He's not getting a cent," Kevin declared, his normally gentle demeanor hardened by protective anger. "Not after everything we went through." Friends provided emotional support, scheduling regular check-ins, and handling small errands that became overwhelming amid the legal stress. My business launch delayed as the lawsuit consumed my attention and energy. Meanwhile, Richard launched what could only be described as a smear campaign in our hometown. Former neighbors received calls describing me as an ungrateful daughter withholding support from a struggling father. Childhood friends texted asking if I had really abandoned my dad when he needed help. At church, Mom overheard whispers about money changing people. The worst came from Melissa, who somehow obtained my email address and sent lengthy messages alternating between guilt-inducing pleas and veiled threats. "Richard has been so depressed since you turned your back on him," one read. "If anything happens to him because of financial stress, I hope you can live with that." Rebecca advised documenting everything while avoiding direct engagement. "This strengthens our case," she assured me. "They're demonstrating a pattern of emotional manipulation." As we prepared our response to the lawsuit, Rebecca suggested investigating Richard's past more thoroughly. His claim mentions previous financial support that we know didn't happen. Let's see what else he's misrepresenting. The investigation revealed disturbing patterns. Richard had left 2 other families before ours, one in Pennsylvania and another in Illinois, each with children he had similarly abandoned. Court records showed multiple judgments for unpaid child support across 3 states, none satisfied. More relevant to our case, Richard had attempted similar legal maneuver before. When his mother passed away 5 years earlier, he had sued his sister over her inheritance, claiming he deserved an equal share despite being explicitly excluded from the will. The case was dismissed, but not before his sister incurred substantial legal costs. Most recently, Richard had filed bankruptcy protection twice in 3 years, with creditors including multiple casinos and payday loan companies, confirming my suspicions about gambling problems. Armed with this history, we completed our formal response to the lawsuit and prepared for the hearing. Rebecca coached me on courtroom procedures and likely questioning. We compiled a chronological record of Richard's absence, supported by documentation for each year he claimed involvement. The night before court, Mom brought over dinner correctly, guessing I wouldn't eat otherwise. As we sat at my kitchen table, she took my hand. "I need you to know something," she said quietly. "When your grandmother left you that money, she told me her plans beforehand." I agreed completely. She saw how you held us together all those years, how you sacrificed your own needs. This inheritance isn't just about money, it's recognition of who you are. Don't let Richard tarnish that. Those words became my anchor as I prepared to face the father who had never been a father at all. The morning of the hearing arrived with gray skies and persistent drizzle. I awoke at 5:30 a.m. after barely 3 hours of restless sleep, my anxiety manifesting in a precise pre-court routine. I showered using the lavender soap Mom had brought over, applied minimal makeup, and dressed in the navy suit Rebecca had recommended, professional but not ostentatious. I choked down half a piece of toast and tea, my stomach too knotted for proper breakfast. Rebecca picked me up at 8:15, her calm demeanor steadying as we reviewed key points one final time. "Remember," she said, "navigating through morning traffic, Judge Harriman is known for two things: punctuality and zero tolerance for exaggeration. Stick to verifiable facts." The county courthouse stood imposingly in the center of downtown, its limestone facade darkened by rain. Security screening and check-in consumed 30 minutes, leaving us in the designated courtroom by 9:00 a.m. for our 9:30 hearing. Richard and his attorney arrived at 9:27, cutting it deliberately close. My first glimpse of my father in his court attire caused a jolt of recognition. He wore the same blue tie he had worn to my elementary school concert 20 years earlier, the last school function he had attended before disappearing. The detail seemed both calculated and disturbing. His attorney, Maxwell Daniels, personified the stereotype of an aggressive litigator, expensive suit alligator briefcase, and a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. They took seats at the opposite table without acknowledging our presence. Judge Caroline Harriman entered precisely at 9:30, a slender woman in her 60s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. After preliminary introductions, she reviewed the case file with a furrowed brow, occasionally glancing up at Richard with poorly concealed skepticism. "Mr. Daniels," she began, "your client's claim to his adult daughter's inheritance appears unprecedented. Please clarify your legal theory." Daniels rose with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, this case centers on family obligation and equity. Mr. Harrington contributed genetically and environmentally to his daughter's development and character formation. These contributions directly enabled her to manage and grow the inheritance she received. Furthermore, he provided guidance and support throughout her formative years, creating the responsible adult who stands before you today. Now, facing health and financial challenges in his later years, he merely seeks reasonable support from a daughter who has received substantial windfall wealth." I gripped the edge of the table as rage and disbelief surged through me. Every sentence contained blatant lies about our history. Rebecca placed a calming hand on my arm, silently reminding me to maintain composure. When Richard took the stand, his performance proved masterful. His voice trembled appropriately when describing supposed efforts to maintain contact after the unfortunate separation from our family. He claimed Mom had deliberately obstructed his visitation attempts and hidden his support checks. He described phantom phone calls, birthday visits, and school meetings that existed only in his fabricated narrative. "I worked 3 jobs," sometimes he testified, eyes downcast, "sending whatever I could manage, never knowing if Lindsay and Kevin received the gifts or even knew they came from me." The most outrageous claim centered around my college years, where he described monthly contributions to my education and regular mentoring sessions about business careers. In reality, I had worked multiple jobs while carrying full course loads, graduating with substantial student debt. "I always told Lindsay that education was paramount," he said, wiping an imaginary tear. "Seeing her succeed made all my sacrifices worthwhile." His medical claims proved equally fictional descriptions of heart problems and medication costs that contradicted the gambling evidence we had compiled. Throughout his testimony, I documented each lie on the legal pad Rebecca had provided, sometimes writing so forcefully the pen tore through the paper. Judge Harriman maintained a neutral expression but occasionally jotted notes when contradictions became particularly glaring. More concerning was her occasional nod during Richard's emotional appeals about family obligation and parental needs. When Richard described his current financial hardship, his performance peaked with perfect pathos. "I've exhausted my resources just managing basic medical needs," he claimed. "While my daughter lives in luxury from wealth that by all rights should support our entire family." Daniels guided him through carefully crafted questions about his relationship with Eleanor, my grandmother. Richard claimed regular visits and supportive conversations entirely contradicted by reality. "Eleanor always said families should support each other," he testified, a statement so contrary to my grandmother's actual values that I nearly gasped aloud. As Richard's testimony concluded, dread settled in my stomach. Despite the preparation and evidence, his performance seemed convincingly sincere. Judge Harriman's expression had softened slightly during his health descriptions, suggesting potential sympathy. Rebecca began her cross-examination, methodically establishing timeline inconsistencies, with school records showing no contact information for Richard after his departure. He dismissed these as administrative errors. She presented certified child support payment records, showing not a single payment received. He claimed they must have been sent to incorrect addresses. For each documented contradiction, Richard offered plausible-sounding excuses delivered with injured sincerity. When Rebecca presented evidence of his gambling habits, he described occasional networking events at casinos that had been mischaracterized. The most disturbing moment came when Richard attempted to approach me directly during a brief recess, his expression shifting from courtroom contrition to cold calculation when Judge Harriman stepped out. "We could have settled this privately," he murmured, close enough that only I could hear. "Family business shouldn't be public. Still time to be reasonable." The bailiff intervened, enforcing proper courtroom separation, but the mask had slipped enough to reinforce my resolve. As Judge Harriman returned and called the court back to session, Rebecca squeezed my hand. "Your turn next," she whispered. "Remember who you are." When called to testify, I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom following my progress. After being sworn in, I took a deep breath and focused on Judge Harriman's neutral expression rather than Richard's calculating gaze. Rebecca began with simple background questions, establishing my education, career progression, and current business endeavors. Her methodical approach helped settle my nerves as we moved toward the heart of the matter. "Miss Harrington," she said, "please describe your relationship with your father after he left your family home when you were 8 years old." "There was no relationship," I stated clearly. "After he left in March of 1999, I saw him exactly 3 times over the next 20 years. Once by accident at a grocery store when I was 16, once at a restaurant when I was 23, when he needed money for car repairs, and most recently after he learned about my inheritance." Rebecca presented a calendar I had created, documenting every birthday, holiday, school, event, and hospital stay where Richard had been absent. The calendar spanned 20 years with supporting documentation for each significant date, programs from school performances, showing only my mother's name as guardian, hospital visitor logs during Kevin's treatments, parent-teacher conference sign-in sheets. "Were any financial support payments received from your father after he left?" Rebecca asked. "None," I confirmed. "My mother worked multiple jobs to support us. I began working at 15 to help with household expenses. We received no child support birthday gifts or holiday presents after the first year of his absence." We methodically addressed each false claim from Richard's testimony. I presented my college financial aid applications, showing no parental contribution student loan documents in my name alone and work schedules, demonstrating the multiple jobs I had maintained during my education. As we built a factual counter-narrative to Richard's fabrications, I noticed Judge Harriman's expression shifting from neutral to increasingly troubled, especially when presented with medical records showing Kevin's condition and associated costs that Richard had never contributed toward. The most powerful evidence came in the form of my childhood diaries, which Mom had preserved. Rebecca had selected specific entries documenting the impact of Richard's abandonment. My 9th birthday, watching the door for his promised appearance Christmas mornings, when Kevin still asked if Dad would visit my 16th birthday. When I had finally stopped expecting his call, a particularly devastating entry from when I was 12 described my hospitalization for pneumonia. "Mom sleeps in the hospital chair every night even though she has work. The nurses tried calling Dad, but his number doesn't work anymore. Mom says he's probably just busy, but I saw her crying in the bathroom." With each piece of evidence, Richard's fabricated narrative unraveled further. Judge Harriman's expression had transformed from initial skepticism to visible concern as the pattern of abandonment and subsequent manipulation became undeniable. Rebecca then presented documentation of Richard's gambling debts, bankruptcy filings, and previous legal actions against other family members. Most damaging was evidence of his similar claims against his sister following their mother's death, establishing a pattern of targeting family members for financial gain. Miss Harrington, Rebecca continued, "When did your father first contact you after learning about your inheritance?" 2 days after the local paper ran a small story about an anonymous scholarship I had established at my former high school, I answered. The article mentioned it was funded by a former valedictorian from my graduation year, which identified me indirectly. And what was the nature of that contact? A lunch invitation where he claimed to have been trying to find me for years, I replied. This contradicted reality since my mother had lived in the same house with the same phone number since I was born. He could have contacted me at any point. We then presented the escalating pattern of financial requests Richard had made after re-establishing contact, beginning with the loan of $5,000 and increasing to demands for co-signing on vehicles and property, investments. Bank records confirmed the money transfer and showed no repayment attempts. Text messages and recorded phone conversations revealed Richard's true intentions. In one particularly damning recording legally obtained under Ohio's one-party consent law, Richard told a friend he had hit the jackpot with my inheritance and planned to get what's rightfully mine through guilt if possible, and legal action if necessary. As the recording played, Richard's face flushed with anger. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering urgently, but Daniels merely shook his head slightly, recognizing the damage couldn't be undone. Judge Harriman requested the recording be played a second time, her expression hardening as Richard's calculated approach became undeniable. When she looked at him directly afterward, her previous hints of sympathy had vanished completely. Rebecca's final questions addressed my grandmother Eleanor's relationship with Richard. I confirmed they had met only twice at my parents' wedding, and once when I was about 6 years old. Eleanor's will specifically noted her assets had been independently acquired with no contribution from Richard, a point reinforced by the estate attorney's affidavit. Miss Harrington, Rebecca said, approaching her conclusion, "In your own words, what has your father contributed to your life and development?" I paused, considering the question carefully while looking directly at Richard for the first time since taking the stand. The courtroom fell silent, the weight of 20 years of absence hanging between us. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "The only thing my father ever gave me was a lesson in how to live without him. He's not here for justice, he's here to steal what my grandmother earned and I protected. This isn't about family, it's about greed. And I have the bank records proving he's attempted this before with his other abandoned children." The silence that followed felt physical. Richard's face drained of color as I referenced his other family's information his attorney had clearly not anticipated being public. Judge Harriman's eyebrows raised sharply, and she made several rapid notes before looking up. "Other children, Miss Harrington?" she inquired. "Yes, Your Honor. Our investigation discovered 2 previous families my father abandoned before ours with children he similarly neglected. Court records show unpaid child support judgments in Pennsylvania and Illinois. He attempted a similar inheritance claim against his sister 5 years ago when their mother passed away. Richard attempted to interrupt rising halfway from his chair before his attorney firmly pulled him back down. The damage was done, the calculated facade had crumbled completely. Daniels attempted recovery during cross-examination, suggesting my perspective was clouded by childhood resentment and adult bitterness. His questions tried to frame Richard's absence as misunderstanding rather than abandonment, his recent financial requests as normal family assistance rather than exploitation. I maintained composure, answering truthfully, without the emotional reactions he clearly hoped to provoke. When he questioned my establishment of trusts for Mom and Kevin while excluding Richard, I simply stated I provided for the family members who were present in my life. As my testimony concluded and I returned to our table, Richard attempted to make eye contact, his expression cycling rapidly between anger and calculated contrition. I focused straight ahead, refusing further engagement with his manipulations. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Harriman reviewed her notes before addressing us directly. "This court finds no legal basis for the plaintiff's claims." Judge Harriman's decisive ruling came after less than 20 minutes of deliberation. Her voice carried unmistakable disapproval as she continued, "Mr. Harrington's petition is denied in its entirety. Furthermore, this court finds the filing to be frivolous and potentially vexatious in nature." The relief flooding through me made it difficult to focus on her subsequent statements about court costs and filing restrictions. Rebecca squeezed my hand underneath the table as Judge Harriman concluded with a rarely issued penalty against Richard and his attorney for filing a lawsuit without reasonable legal foundation. As the session adjourned, Richard pushed past his attorney and approached our table with unexpected speed. His face flushed with anger, he pointed accusingly. "You turned my own mother against me, and now my daughter. This isn't over." The bailiff moved quickly between us as Rebecca gathered our documents. In that moment of confrontation, I found a clarity and calm I hadn't expected. "It is over, Richard," I stated simply. "It was over 20 years ago when you decided a relationship with your children wasn't worth your time. Today just makes it official." I walked away without waiting for his response, head high despite exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, Mom and Kevin waited anxiously, embracing me as Rebecca confirmed the favorable ruling. The significance transcended the legal victory. I had finally confronted the abandonment that had shaped so much of my life. That evening, friends organized an impromptu gathering at my apartment. They arrived with food, drinks, and congratulatory hugs, creating the celebration I had been too overwhelmed to arrange myself. As conversation and laughter filled my living room, I slipped onto the balcony for a moment of quiet reflection. Mom joined me there, leaning against the railing in comfortable silence before speaking. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "Not for winning, for standing up for yourself." The weeks following the court decision brought unexpected media attention. A legal blog covering unusual cases published an article about Richard's unprecedented claim, which was subsequently picked up by larger outlets. Interview requests arrived from legal podcasts and local news programs, most seeking sensational details about family estrangement and inheritance disputes. Rebecca advised declining most interviews to preserve privacy, but suggested one carefully selected legal education podcast where I could help others facing similar situations. That single interview led to connections with family law advocates working to strengthen protections against exploitative claims from estranged relatives. Though the court victory provided legal resolution, emotional healing required different work. I began regular sessions with Dr. Melissa Chen, a therapist specializing in family estrangement and adult children of abandonment. Our weekly conversations helped untangle the complex emotions surrounding Richard's reappearance and manipulation. "Abandonment creates primal wounds," Dr. Chen explained during one particularly difficult session. "Your father's return triggered both the child who still wanted his approval and the adult who recognized his manipulation. Both responses are valid." Through therapy, I recognized how Richard's abandonment had shaped my approach to relationships, my hesitation to depend on others, my over-responsibility in friendships, my discomfort with receiving help. Naming these patterns became the first step toward changing them. 3 months after the court decision, I officially launched my digital marketing agency with a clear focus on supporting small businesses and nonprofit organizations. The business plan I had developed during Eleanor's final months now became reality, with office space in a renovated downtown building and 2 part-time employees assisting with client projects. True to my promise, I established the Eleanor Grant Foundation with a portion of my inheritance, creating a structured program to assist single-parent families with educational expenses. The foundation's first official act awarded college scholarships to 5 students from single-parent households, each receiving funding for tuition and required textbooks. Mom's cancer treatment progressed successfully, moving from active intervention to monitoring appointments. With financial security established through the trust, she reduced her work schedule to part-time, finally pursuing the community college art classes she had postponed for decades. Her first exhibition, Watercolor Landscapes, inspired by Eleanor's garden, sold out completely. Kevin's medical condition stabilized with consistent treatment access. The specialized care covered by his trust fund introduced innovative therapies unavailable through standard insurance. By year's end, he had reduced his medication requirements by 30% and returned to full-time work as a software developer. The most unexpected development came through an email from Jennifer Harrington, a half-sister I hadn't known existed until our legal investigation uncovered Richard's previous families. Her message was tentative, expressing both curiosity and concern about making contact. Our first video call revealed striking similarities. We shared the same laugh, the same analytical approach to problems, even the same habit of tucking hair behind our ears when concentrating. Jennifer introduced me to another half-brother, Mark, from Richard's first marriage. Both had experienced similar abandonment patterns, creating an instant understanding between us. "It's weird," Jennifer remarked during our third call. "I spent years thinking I was somehow responsible for him leaving. Finding out there's a pattern doesn't fix it, but it helps knowing it wasn't about me." The three of us established a monthly virtual gathering, sharing experiences and building connections Richard had never bothered to nurture. Jennifer's 2 children became honorary niece and nephew, expanding our family circle in ways Richard could never have anticipated. While rebuilding my life and establishing these new connections, I occasionally received messages from Melissa, Richard's wife. Initially demanding and accusatory, her tone gradually shifted toward desperation as Richard's gambling problems apparently worsened. I maintained consistent boundaries, suggesting appropriate addiction resources rather than financial assistance. The final communication from Richard arrived on my 29th birthday, a generic card with no personal message containing a newspaper clipping about a charity poker tournament benefiting gambling addiction recovery. Whether intended as manipulation or genuine reflection remained unclear. After consideration, I chose not to respond. Dr. Chen helped me understand that forgiveness and reconciliation remained separate concepts. "Forgiveness is releasing yourself from the burden of anger," she explained. "Reconciliation requires mutual accountability and change. You can choose one without the other." Over time, I developed a peaceful acceptance of my history with Richard. The anger that had fueled me through the court case gradually transformed into something quieter. Not forgetting or excusing, but recognizing his limitations reflected his issues rather than my worth. 1 year after the court decision, I stood before the 2nd annual scholarship ceremony for the Eleanor Grant Foundation. Looking at the 5 new recipients, bright, determined students who reminded me of my younger self, I felt my grandmother's wisdom continuing through generations she would never meet. True fortune, I told them, isn't measured by bank accounts, but by the people who show up consistently in your life. Sometimes family means the people who choose to stay, not those who share your DNA. The most valuable inheritance is resilience, the ability to build something meaningful despite or perhaps because of the challenges you've faced. That evening, returning to my apartment, I paused before the silver-framed photograph of Eleanor on my bookshelf. "Thank you," I whispered, touching the frame gently. "Not just for the money, but for showing me what strength really looks like." Have you ever had to stand up to someone who only appeared in your life when they wanted something from you? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. Your story might help someone else finding their voice. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more stories about setting boundaries and building the family we choose. Remember to like and share this video if you found it meaningful. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth isn't determined by those who left, but by the strength you found in their absence.